Well, howdy, friends. Let me tell you, it cost me exactly $1,478 in smashed mailboxes and landed me with over $5,000 in bogus HOA fines before I finally quit playing Linda's game. I'd had enough, so I built a mailbox based on an old 40-year-old survey map and a forgotten federal law that she and the entire HOA board had completely missed. And that, my friends, is when things really got interesting. I want to hear from you too. What's the most ridiculous, nitpicky thing an HOA has ever tried to pull in your neighborhood? Drop it in the comments. Stick around, because I'm going to show you exactly how we turned their precious rulebook into the weapon that toppled their little empire. And tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. For those new here, my name's Hank. And if there's one thing I've lived by, it's this: measure twice, cut once. I spent 40 years as a civil engineer with that mindset. It's all about planning, precision, and doing the job right the first time so you don't have to worry about it again. I intended to carry that same philosophy into retirement. My wife, the endlessly patient Mary, and I had finally done it. We saved up enough to buy our forever place. Not a mansion, nothing extravagant, just a good, solid home sitting on 3 acres just outside of town. It had towering oak trees, plenty of space for a garden that could feed an army, and the kind of peace and quiet that makes you forget the freeway even exists. We called it our slice of heaven. But that slice of heaven had one tiny, almost invisible string attached. By the narrowest technicality, our lot was part of a newer master-planned neighborhood called Maple Ridge Estates. And that string had a name: Linda. Linda was the president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. From the moment we met her at a welcome cookout, I knew we were in for a bumpy ride. She was a woman in her mid-60s, drove a white luxury SUV, and wore tennis visors indoors. She had that particular look, you know the one, the kind that sizes you up, finds you lacking, and judges you all in the blink of an eye. Our property, with its rustic style, was clearly an eyesore in her perfectly manicured kingdom. Most Maple Ridge homes were cookie-cutter, decent enough, but crammed onto postage stamp lots. Our house was the oddball. Linda strolled over with a plate carrying one sad-looking brownie and said, with a smile that never reached her eyes, "It must be such hard work trying to bring an old lot like this up to Maple Ridge standards." Not a welcome to the neighborhood, but a backhanded critique. That was Linda's opening move. The first real skirmish, of course, was the mailbox. Our property didn't have one, so I went down to the hardware store, picked up a standard USPS-approved box and a sturdy wooden post. I spent a Saturday digging, mixing the concrete, and setting it perfectly. The smell of fresh mulch I spread around the base smelled like accomplishment. The final thump of my fist on the post to test its sturdiness felt like me declaring, "This is our home." A week later, we came back from grocery shopping to find it totally destroyed, flattened. There were wide tire marks in the soft dirt shoulder, plain as day. The post was snapped, the box crumpled, its little red flag bent into a sad metal hook. Teenagers, Mary sighed. I figured she was right. Random vandalism, annoying, but part of life anywhere. So, with a deep breath and a few muttered words Mary pretended not to hear, I grabbed my tools. The harsh screech of the bent metal as I pulled the post from its concrete base was the true start of the whole mess. I just didn't know it yet. So I built a second mailbox. I went through the whole routine again. New post, new box, mixed another sack of concrete. This time I used bolts to fasten the post to the footing, figuring it'd be easier to swap out if lightning or, teenagers struck again. I made it sturdier, straighter, better than before. I even painted the post a clean, respectable forest green to match our house trim. It looked sharp. Too sharp, apparently. 2 days later, a crisp cream envelope appeared in the mail slot on our front door. It had the Maple Ridge Estates logo embossed at the top. It wasn't a welcome note, it was a formal violation notice. I can still picture it. Maple Ridge Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, Article 4, Section 2. A. All mailbox support structures must be painted ecological beige, Pantone 7527C. The structure currently installed utilizes forest green, which is a non-compliant color. A fine of $50 has been assessed to your account. Please remedy this violation within 15 days to avoid further penalties. Ecological beige, a hue so bland, so utterly devoid of personality, it could only be born of a committee. The color of weak coffee, of dusty cubicles, of sheer resignation. It was hands down the ugliest color I'd ever been ordered to use. Mary laughed and said, "Don't let her get under your skin." But it wasn't the paint. It was being told what to do on my own land by a woman who seemed to live for other people's misery. Still, I tried to be the reasonable neighbor. I drove to the paint store and had them mix a quart of that beige atrocity. I spent a Saturday carefully painting the post. Every stroke felt like a tiny piece of my soul giving up. I snapped a photo of the finished product, emailed it with a sugary note to the HOA management company, and certified my compliance. The mailbox looked pitiful, like it was ashamed to exist. You can guess what happened next. The following Tuesday, we came home to find the beige mailbox flattened, crushed with the same deliberate automotive malice as the first. Only this time, as I knelt in the dirt studying the splintered wood of the post, something caught my eye. A tiny speck of pearlescent white paint embedded right in the grain. Small, no bigger than my pinky nail, but unmistakable. The exact shade of Linda's pristine luxury SUV. And that's when everything shifted. This wasn't random. This wasn't teenagers. This was a declaration of war. My blood ran hot, but an engineer doesn't let anger run the show. Rage is messy. Evidence is clean. I needed proof. So instead of stomping to her door, I headed to a sporting goods store. I walked out with an $80 trail camera, the kind hunters use to spot deer. That evening, right at dusk, I crossed the street. There was a big old oak on the edge of the common area with a perfect view of where my mailbox would sit. I strapped the camera on, camouflaged it with a few branches, and set it to record on motion. The barely audible click of the test shot was the sound of a trap snapping shut. Then, for the third time, I went to the hardware store. I bought the same mailbox, the same post. I bolted it back to the concrete footing and with grim satisfaction painted it the ugliest, most compliant ecological beige you've ever seen. And then I waited. The ball was in her court. It didn't take long, less than a week. I'd gotten used to checking the trail cam's SD card every morning, feeling like a spy on my own street. Then one morning, there it was. Grainy footage, time-stamped 2:17 a.m., shot in that eerie infrared that makes everything look like a ghost tale. But the subject was crystal clear. A familiar white luxury SUV, the same one I saw Linda driving daily, slowed as it approached my place. It made a sharp, deliberate turn, climbed its front passenger side wheel over my mailbox with a violent crunch, then corrected and drove off without even tapping the brakes. You couldn't see the driver through the glare, but you didn't have to. I had the vehicle, the act, the time. I saved the clip to a thumb drive, sealed the paint chip in a little plastic bag, and felt a surge of righteous adrenaline. This was it, check and mate. The next HOA board meeting was in the community center's sad little conference room. It smelled of stale coffee and quiet despair. Linda and her two board loyalists, one woman who looked permanently startled and a man who looked permanently half asleep, sat at the front table. I waited through 20 minutes of debate about acceptable gnome height before my turn came. I stood, calm and steady. "I have evidence regarding the repeated destruction of my property," I began. I laid out the timeline, the 3 mailboxes, the costs. I held up the paint chip. I found this at the scene of the second incident. Finally, I opened my laptop. And I have video of the third incident. I played the clip. The board leaned in, watching the white SUV deliberately crush my mailbox. When it ended, I looked straight at Linda. Silence. She didn't flinch. She scoffed. "That could be any white SUV," she waved off. "There are dozens like that in the county." "Are you accusing me, Hank? In a public meeting?" "This feels like targeted harassment." The sleepy-looking treasurer chimed in. "The video is inconclusive. It's blurry. We can't act on speculation or circumstantial evidence." They refused a second viewing. They thanked me for my time and tossed my claim. The system wasn't just broken. It was a fortress built to shield it. I spent an entire night fueled by coffee and frustration, digging through city codes, county ordinances, and eventually federal rules. And there it was, knowledge nugget number 1. USPS Postal Operations. Manual, Section DMM 500. 8. It lays out the regulations for mail receptacles, and buried in the legal jargon was the key point. Mailboxes are considered federal property, and the USPS sets the rules for their construction, placement, and access. The takeaway? Federal law protecting mail delivery outweighs the petty aesthetic rules of a local HOA. The next morning, I drafted a polite but ice-cold letter. I cited the exact federal regulation and stated that their repeated actions and fines amounted to interference with the delivery of United States mail, a federal offense. I attached a copy of my bill for the third mailbox, and at the bottom, under my name, I added 2 little letters that change everything in a fight like this. CC. I sent a copy to the regional postmaster general. Let's see how Linda's little board handled a letter from the federal government. Playing the federal card worked like magic for a while. About a week later, I logged into the HOA's clunky online portal. The $750 in fines had simply vanished. No email, no apology, no acknowledgement. Just gone. Wiped clean like they never existed. But the war wasn't over. It just went cold. The air in the neighborhood grew tense. Linda stopped making eye contact. Instead, she'd drive by and give our house a long, calculating stare. The kind of look a wolf gives a watchdog. She was respecting the boundary for now, but searching for a weakness. I hadn't won. I'd forced a stalemate. If I had won the legal battle for the moment, it was time to win the physical one. I'm an engineer, for crying out loud. If I couldn't build a mailbox that could withstand a suburban SUV, I didn't deserve my degree. So I drew up plans. This wasn't going to be another wooden post. This was going to be a monument to stubbornness. I spent the weekend on what I called the Fort Knox project. I bought a heavy-duty galvanized steel mailbox, the kind built to survive snowplows. Then I hauled home 24 bags of concrete mix, steel rebar, and a pallet of red bricks that matched our house. I built a form, poured a massive concrete base, and with patient determination started laying brick. It had been years since I'd done masonry, but it came back. The sharp smell of wet mortar filled the air. The slick scrape of the trowel smoothing joints was like music. I built a solid 2-foot by 2-foot column of brick and mortar, encasing the steel mailbox in a fortress of pure, immovable mass. When I was done, it looked less like a mailbox and more like a guard tower. It was glorious. Covered in dust and sweat, I stood back and thought, "All right, Linda, let's see you run this one over." But she didn't. That was the brilliance of her next move. She didn't touch it. A few days later, I spotted her white SUV parked across the street. Not driving by, just stopped. She sat there for a moment, then slowly raised her phone and snapped pictures from different angles. Then she drove off. No drama, no confrontation. Honestly, it was creepier than seeing it smashed. A week later, a shiny county public works truck pulled up. This wasn't a Lexus, it had the official seal on the door. A man in a hard hat and vest stepped out with a clipboard. He was polite, professional, and the bearer of doom. "Sir," he said gently, "we've had a complaint about an unpermitted structure in the county right-of-way." My stomach dropped. He explained that while the mailbox itself was fine, the massive brick enclosure was technically a structure. And because it sat within the first 20 feet of my property line, it was in the county's legal right-of-way. It violated Municipal Code 114B. Linda hadn't used HOA rules. She'd gone over my head and weaponized the county. I was given a formal notice, 14 days to demolish my fortress at my own expense. If I didn't, the county would do it, send me the bill, plus daily fines and a possible lien on my property. I had been completely outmaneuvered. I stared at the demolition order, looking at my brick masterpiece. It wasn't a monument to my defiance. It was a monument to my failure. Out hundreds more dollars, publicly defeated, back at square one. It was the lowest I'd felt in the entire mess. I had lost. Queen. I sat in my small office staring at the pile of papers that summed up my failure. Receipts for 4 destroyed mailboxes, bogus HOA violation notices, and on top, the official demolition order from the county. The setting sun stretched shadows across the room, everything heavy. Mary came in, laid a hand on my shoulder, and looked at the mess on the desk. "Honey," she said softly, full of reason, "this is insane. She's obsessed with you. Let's just give up on the mailbox. We can rent a P.O. box in town. It's not worth this stress, please." She was right. Any rational person would have walked away. But as I stared at that demolition order, something inside me hardened. It wasn't about the mailbox anymore. It was about being bullied. It was about this woman thinking she could steamroll anyone who didn't fit her perfect world. This was our home, our forever home. And I wasn't about to be pushed off my own land by a tyrant with a tennis visor. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "I'm not letting her win. Not like this." That refusal sparked a new fire. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was on a mission. If I couldn't win by building, I would win by reading. I went to the hall closet and pulled out the thick accordion file from when we bought the house. It held everything: title reports, inspections, loans, and the bulkiest of all, the original covenants, conditions, and restrictions for Maple Ridge Estates, dated 1984. I dumped the whole thing on the dining table and started reading. Hours of mind-numbing legal jargon later, I found it. At the very back, tucked inside a folded legal-sized envelope, was the original full-scale plat map of the subdivision. A real blueprint full of surveyor marks and precise measurements. Old, wrinkled, faded, but clear. And that's when I saw it. I grabbed my old engineer's scale ruler. The newer maps the HOA used just showed a bold property line. But this original showed a thin dotted line running parallel to the road, set back deep into my property. It was labeled 15 Utility Access Easement. My heart hammered. I flipped back to the CC and Rs. The words leapt off the page. First, the easement, a 15-foot strip of land, was designated for use by utility companies, including the U.S. Postal Service. Second, a clause I'd skimmed before now had new meaning. The HOA, not the individual homeowner, was legally responsible for maintaining all such easements in the community. The implications hit like a freight train. 1. The ground my mailbox stood on, the ground Linda kept targeting, was land the HOA was supposed to maintain. 2. The fines they'd slapped on me for failure to maintain were completely fraudulent. They were fining me for not doing their job. And the finishing blow: any utility structure like a USPS mailbox built within that easement fell under municipal utility codes, not the HOA's cosmetic rules. I'd been fighting on her turf all along, but I'd actually been standing on ground that legally belonged to another authority. You. I leaned back, old documents spread like a battle plan, and a slow grin spread across my face. The game had just changed. That discovery flipped a switch. I was no longer a defender, but an attacker. And a good engineer knows, complex projects require a team of specialists. My first call was to a neighbor down the street, an old man named Harris. Harris was a retired county surveyor, perpetually grumpy, with a deep hatred of the HOA, and Linda in particular. I showed him the plat map. He squinted through dusty glasses, then let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned, Hank," he muttered, cracking a rare smile. "She's been hassling you over ground she's supposed to mow." The next day, he came over with his old transit and tripod, took measurements, and drove a wooden stake 15 feet from the road. "That's the line," he declared. "Official." Next, I needed legal firepower. I wasn't making another mistake. I spent a day searching property lawyers and found a young woman named Claire. Her firm specialized in fighting overreaching HOAs. She was sharp, worked flat fee, and during our video call, her eyes lit up when I explained. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a giant slayer. We had a strategy session with Harris patched in. Claire laid it out clean and fierce. First, she said, "We stop being victims. We send them a bill." That was knowledge nugget number 2. Linda's harassment caused damages on property the HOA was responsible for. So we draft an itemized invoice for all 4 mailboxes: paint, concrete, bricks, demolition costs, and my labor hours billed at contractor rates. We cite the CC and R clause, making them liable. Takeaway: you can hold your HOA financially accountable for neglecting duties defined in their own documents. Next, the permit for the new mailbox. We don't even involve the HOA. Knowledge nugget number 3. Harris chuckled. We'd file a permit application directly with county planning and zoning. And not just for a mailbox, for a federally compliant mail access utility point and official survey monument. By bundling it with a registered survey marker, it becomes a municipal and utility issue, not a cosmetic one. Takeaway: classifying a project under higher government authority can render HOA rules irrelevant. The final piece was the hardware. I called my old buddy Tom, who now owned a custom metal shop. "Tom," I said, "how'd you like to build something that'll make Alexis cry for its mama?" He laughed. "Hank, you just made my week. Send me the specs." And the specs for what we called the Sentinel were glorious. The foundation: a 4-foot deep, 3x3-foot hole packed with rebar and high-strength concrete. Set in the top, an official brass survey plaque, courtesy of one of Harris's county contacts. The mailbox: a single welded piece of 1/4-inch steel plate with an angled prow like an icebreaker. It wasn't just strong, it was designed to transfer impact energy down into the concrete anchor, maximizing damage to anything stupid enough to hit it. For a finishing touch, we planned a small raised garden bed around the base filled with the nastiest thorny succulents and pyracantha bushes I could find. A painful but pretty welcome mat. The plan was set. The team assembled. The war was about to begin for real. I walked out stunned. The counterpunch landed 2 days later via certified mail. A letter from the board. Not only were they doing nothing, they were fining me $500 for failure to maintain property in good repair, citing my now-destroyed third mailbox, and another $250 for installing an unapproved surveillance device on what they called HOA common property, the tree across the street. That's when the engineer in me shut down, and the angry Texan took over for about 5 minutes. Then the engineer rebooted, angrier and focused. If their rulebook was a weapon, I needed a bigger rulebook. Our opening moves were quiet but precise. Claire sent the invoice for just over $3,000 to the HOA via certified mail, signature required. No, it got lost. The next day, Harris and I walked the finalized permit into the county planning office. The clerk, a no-nonsense woman with formidable glasses, gave it a close look. She saw Harris's surveyor stamp, the federal mail statutes Claire had attached, and she stamped it approved with a satisfying ka-chunk. The only sign of our intent was a lonely orange flag, Harris planted in the yard marking the future survey monument. I would have paid to see Linda's face when she signed for that certified letter. When she opened it and saw a professional invoice billing her own HOA for vandalism and damages, I imagined the color left her cheeks. This wasn't a homeowner gripe she could shrug off. This was a legal and financial strike. Cornered, she grew dangerous. Her first response was to try to fight fire with fire. She trotted down to the county office to protest our permit. Claire had warned me she might, and had already prepped the clerk. Linda launched into a tirade about an unapproved monstrosity. The clerk, bless her, let her finish and then explained. The permit was for a registered utility access point and survey marker, fully compliant with county and federal regs, co-signed by a licensed surveyor. The HOA's aesthetic rules didn't apply. Her objection was noted and dismissed. Checkmate. Linda escalated on social media. That evening, a post hit the Maple Ridge Community Facebook page, an all-caps manipulative screed. "Dear neighbors," she wrote, "I'm so sad to say this. The new owner on Lot 1, Hank, is trying to build an industrial eyesore that violates the spirit of our neighborhood. He's suing the HOA. Your dues will go up to pay his legal fees. He's lowering property values and intimidating our board. We must stand together." The post lit up. Mary and I stared at comments, some screaming outrage, some genuine worry about dues, but others skeptical. All this over a mailbox? He repainted it 3 times. What's the story? A few neighbors defended us. I realized Linda didn't control everyone. The question was, who would show up when it mattered? Installation day arrived on a perfect Tuesday. It wasn't just construction, it was theater. At 8 a.m., Dave's fabrication truck, Tom's crew, pulled up with a small crane, the ready-mix truck followed, and Harris stood by in his surveyor vest looking very pleased. The Facebook drama had turned our project into a neighborhood event. Curtains twitched, and dog walkers timed their routes. As hoped, a crowd gathered. Linda screeched down the street in her SUV, slammed to a halt and jumped out, phone already recording, face red with fury. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked. "This is unapproved. I forbid this. You're being sued." Tom's crew ignored her. They'd seen every yard narcissist before. I nodded calmly. "Morning, Linda. We have the permits." She went nuclear and even tried to bribe Tom to walk away. Tom sipped his coffee and laughed. "Lady, I wouldn't build a doghouse for you for all the tea in China." She called the sheriff. "There's illegal destruction of property," she reported. 15 minutes later, 2 county cruisers pulled up. The deputies were young, professional, and not amused. One officer asked for details. I handed him a folder. County stamped permits, the registered plat map highlighting the utility easement, and Claire's card. He read, glanced at the stake, then at the permit, and nodded. "Ma'am," he said to Linda, "I've reviewed the permits. This is a legal permitted project in a utility easement. HOA rules don't override county permits and federal utility regulations. If you interfere, you could be charged with obstructing a permitted project. Please return to your vehicle." In front of neighbors, Linda was publicly stripped of authority. She sputtered, humiliated, and drove off. Harris winked. The Sentinel went up. The next monthly HOA meeting was standing room only. The showdown with the sheriff had been neighborhood water cooler talk. Claire sat behind us in a sharp blazer, briefcase in hand. Linda, and her cronies looked rattled. She rapped the gavel and launched into a prepared speech about Emergency Bylaw 9C to clamp down on industrial mailbox receptacles. She tried to call a vote. I stood. "Point of order, Madame President." Claire calmly walked to the front, set 4 thick spiral-bound packets on the table. One for each board member, one for the secretary. The room hushed. The first document was our stamped invoice, 30 days past due. The treasurer's face went white. The second contained photographs Harris had taken of Linda's brand-new 6-foot vinyl fence, exactly the kind she'd publicly scolded others for. Highlighted CC and R's lay beside them. The third was a legally vetted petition demanding Linda's recall for fiscal mismanagement, unequal enforcement of covenants, and targeted harassment. We had well over the 51% required. Over 60% of homeowners had signed. The last page was the knockout. A letter from the regional postmaster commending the Sentinel as federally compliant. Linda sat frozen. The other board members edged away. A man in the back motioned to hold the recall vote immediately. It was seconded. The roar of assent was deafening. The vote was unanimous. Linda gathered her things and left without another word. She never attended another meeting. 2 months later, a for sale sign went up in her yard and a moving truck arrived. The white SUV was gone. The newly elected board's first acts were clear. They wrote a check to me for the full invoice. They audited the HOA's accounts and found Linda had been hoarding surplus funds and using them to keep a management company in place that enforced her will. The new board fired the company and used the surplus to build the playground neighbors had been asking for years. The sound of kids laughing gradually replaced months of tension. The Sentinel became a local legend. People used it as a landmark. Kids tapped it for luck on their way to school. With the invoice paid, Claire and I decided to pay it forward. We launched the Homeowner Advocacy Project. Twice a year, we hold a free workshop at the library. I bring plat maps and show people how to read property lines. Claire explains CC and R's and parliamentary procedure in plain English. We teach folks to fight back with knowledge, not rage. It's the best work I've ever done. Some evenings, Mary and I sit on the porch and wave to neighbors walking by. The very thing that had divided the street became a place where people stopped to chat. The mailbox that started a war ended up reconnecting a neighborhood. I finally have what I wanted all along: peace. I learned it wasn't about a box. It was the right to enjoy your own home without being bullied. We fought for peace, and the whole neighborhood got to share it. That's a victory worth the fight. So if you've got a Linda in your area, check the oldest maps you can find. Sometimes the best defense is a piece of forgotten history. Share your HOA nightmare in the comments below. I read everyone. If you enjoyed seeing bureaucracy get a taste of its own medicine, Be sure to subscribe for more stories of justice served.